Live from the Talking Joe Studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe with a special interview edition. Joining us in a minute will be Michael Kelly, the former VP Global Publishing for Hasbro. With 17 years at Hasbro, 12 at the helm of Hasbro's Global Publishing Department, he has headed up the G.I. Joe publishing at Hasbro since the start of IDW's era through to the launch at Skybound. So we'll indeed have many tales to tell. He last joined us all the way back in December 2022, episode 186. So if you want to go back, revisit Michael's origin stories, that's a good place to start. But I will not be talking to him alone. As always, I will be joined by my co-presenter. It's Tim Finn.
Ooh. Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners. And hello to Michael Kelly, our guest. Here he is.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me back.
Michael.
Happy to have
so
you
good
back.
to have you back. I've always wanted, since we last spoke, I felt like there was more to discuss. And certainly with all of the Skybound news, I've left it long enough that there definitely is. I'm very certain of that. So great to have you on and to talk about all of the things that have happened since the last time we spoke. Shall we ask the one of the normal questions that we have when we have a guest on, particularly when we've got the cameras on? Can you tell us a little bit about where you are today and sort of what sort of space you're in?
Yep. So this is actually my home office, which I'm spending more time in now since I no longer work for Hasbro. So this is where the magic happens, if you will. But I am, so I have a nice view out a bunch of windows. It's actually the sun porch off of the master bedroom. So it's a nice sunny spot with a lot of natural light to keep me positive and keep me going. And then I'm surrounded by a lot of the things that I have picked up along the way. So, which is, it's been quite an adventure over the years, to be sure. So, let's see, what can I
Can you tell us about this Indiana Jones art on the wall? It looks like a Marvel cover, and yet it looks not quite like a Marvel cover. What is that?
Yeah, that is a custom piece of art that my wife had made for me because I am a huge fan of Jaws and a huge fan of Indiana Jones. So what better than a mashup that should have happened?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's that. Let's see, what can I... This is pretty near and dear to me. This was literally my first lunchbox back in 1977 when I was 5 and going off to kindergarten for the first time. So this is the real thing from back then. Wow. It's a little the worse for wear, and I'm afraid I lost the thermos, but that's my lunchbox from when I was 5. Let's see. Back there, I've also got, I know you said things other than Joe and Transformers, but this, of course, is the award that we received for Paul Aller's suicide issue on in the G.I. Joe run that he did with IDW, something that's very near and dear to my heart and something I'm exceptionally proud of. So I keep that nearby. I don't know. See anything else that catches your eye?
That seems like a good start.
That's excellent. And I noticed that you've sort of been sharing some bits and pieces on Facebook, so maybe we'll touch on that as we get to it. Sure. So we're sort of with the change to Skybound, big period of change in terms of G.I. Joe comics publishing, and you joined just as the last big period of change was happening, as the comics publishing shifted from Devil's Due to IDW. So you've kind of seen the last of one era, the full stretch of one, and at the very beginnings of another. So we talked a little about the Devil's Due era when we last spoke, and you kind of joined just as it was coming to an end. So the focus was very much on the start of the IDW one. But to what extent did you kind of, because we've been looking at the Devil's Due era in a lot of detail over on Talking Joe and revisiting it. To what extent did you kind of look back on Devil's Due and kind of look at what went well, what didn't go quite so well to inform how you approached IDW, or did you kind of or did you kind of put it to one side and just want a fresh slate, not to be coloured too much by what had come before?
Yeah, actually more the latter, because I think at that point we felt that we really needed a clean start. And so for me, it was making sure that we didn't do what I always try to do, is not absolutely sort of disregard anything that went in the past, but also not be bound by it, right? So I think from my perspective at that stage, coming off of the Devil's Due era, it was like, this is an opportunity for a clean start, new publisher, new head of publishing at Hasbro. Let's just do our own thing and see where it goes. Certainly that's no commentary in a negative way at all on what Devil's Due did. But it just felt like the right time for a completely new start.
And this was also lining up with gearing up for a major Hollywood movie. So there are going to be a lot of eyes on comics in the following year or two anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we tried not to be too influenced by what goes on at the movie studios. You can read into that as you will, but yes, that is true. We knew that we were about to have a lot more just general awareness of the brand, and we wanted something that people could jump on board without any prior experience.
Yeah, talking to some of the creators about those early days at IDW, there seemed to be a little bit of a creative tension about, or creative uncertainty about how much to invest in the success of the movie versus carving out their completely own continuity. And I think the success of the movie as in itself probably helped to kind of direct how much the movie actually impacted beyond what was actually done.
Yeah. I mean, I think you also have to always consider, regardless of how successful a movie is, whether it's Transformers, Joe, Marvel, et cetera, you're reaching a very different audience. And that's the point, right? You want the broadest audience you can possibly get from a film. And you're bringing in people who may have no affinity for the brand or the story at all, but they're intrigued, they're interested. When you're talking about comics, obviously you're talking about a fan base that, even if they're new, they're invested, right? They're interested in moving beyond that 2-hour period in the cinema or at home, and really kind of digging into these characters. So you have to bring a different sense of storytelling and pace, et cetera, if you're going to do that. So, the movies are great. They are fantastic for brand awareness and for really expanding that audience. And we always hope that we bring some of them into the broader aspects of the brand, and the story. But, oftentimes that's the way people want to, they want to watch the movie, they want to enjoy it, and then they're done. Maybe they'll buy a t-shirt. But, for the most part, when you're getting those comic book audience, or any kind of reading, that's an invested fan, and you want to make sure that you're giving them something that's both different and, I guess, a richer experience, if you will.
I think about the difference between Hasbro and Kenner in the 80s, before Hasbro bought Kenner. Hasbro had these brands that were homegrown, and some were popular for many years, like Transformers, and others were more short-lived, like Visionaries, but they were not tied to movies. Kenner was making a lot of toys, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Batman, and Star Wars. There are windows there, and the toy might have this amazing advantage because there is all this added awareness, but there's a start point where the movie is going to get promoted. The movie comes out, and then sooner or later the movie is gone. And I feel like some of the calculus with IDW had to be, well, we've got a potential for a long running GI Joe, the old one or the other old one or a new one, and then we had this movie, and the movie may be a huge hit, and then maybe immediately there's work on a sequel, and 2 years later we'll get a sequel. But even if that had happened, you'd have some movie tie-in comics the year of the movie, and then this gap, and then the year of a sequel, some more movie tie-in comics. And how can an IDW realistically keep sort of the expanded audience from the movie interested in those movie tie-in comics when there's not the movie?
Right. And I think you can do that. It does get difficult to do that too, because the best way, if you want to capture that movie audience in the comics, is you want to give them a prequel, a sequel that literally will tie into the next movie, right? So that they're sort of bridging that content. And the way films are produced and made, it's really difficult to do that. And so, we tried really hard with Transformers in between some of the movies to do continuity building movie-based comics. And the fact is that, half the time the script that we would read that we would base those comics on would change just enough that now it's just a misdirect, right? It doesn't really fit in. It doesn't really make sense. And so, that's really hard unless it's planned out that way from the start and everybody that's involved is on board. Otherwise you do kind of end up with these, that's a what if rather than an actual part of the continuity.
Towards the beginning of the IDW run, the sort of the big bang that has made the lasting impression is probably that the launch of the Cobra series. And I recently listened to an interview with Michael Costa, and one of the interesting takeaways from that interview for me was that he called out the helpfulness that you played in the creation of that comic and some of the creative suggestions. And I think it was particularly in I guess suggesting that Tomux and Zaymot are the antagonists. So can you talk us about that sort of that genesis of that project a little bit, and how you how you balanced being Hasbro suits versus being a hands-on sort of creative partner? How do you kind of balance that whole aspect?
Yeah, I mean, that remains one of my favorite projects that I've ever worked on, to be sure. So when we first were talking about relaunching G.I. Joe with IDW, it was really Andy Schmidt who came up with the idea of let's do a zero issue that's 3 short stories. We'll sell it for $1, and it basically will be like a preview of the 3 different stories. And of course, at that time we had Larry Hama doing Origins. We had Chuck Dixon doing the mainline G.I. Joe book. And then Mike Costa and Christos Gage came in with the Cobra series. And, it was initially pitched as this sort of deep cover espionage story. And I think when Mike suggested Chuckles, your first thought is, what are you talking about? I mean, he's the guy that threw a missile at a tank, right? I mean, that's about all I've got. He wears a Hawaiian shirt. He's about as subtle as, a broken leg. But, it was interesting because he said, look, I'm going to take these characters that are in the lore are kind of considered a little bit goofy. They might have been when the brand was jumping the shark a bit. And I'm going to make them cool. I'm going to make them awesome, and people are going to love them. And, sometimes you just have to trust a creator. You just have to believe that they know what they're doing. And, it's not like carte blanche, but you see the concept, you understand what they want to do. And if you believe in it and you believe in them, then you give them a lot of leeway. And as he started to write, and I'd get those manuscripts in, it really became clear that he was this very, very talented writer of that kind of almost noir-esque, just very intricate and deep storytelling around what it would be like to be a deep cover operative. And really from the very start with that 0 issue short story on Chuckles, I feel like it hit the ground running, and it just never ran out of steam for those first, that first couple of arcs. And yeah, it was interesting. I will say that from a Hasbro perspective, at that time, with me being new to it, and it was a very different company at that time, and there was a lot of hesitation about how the story was going to be told, about how gritty it was going to be, what level of violence and innuendo we were going to allow. And it required a lot of conversations with a lot of people. And, mind you, at that time, my title was senior manager, right? Which is, I don't know, 6 steps below the lead of the publishing department. And I was there, this, senior manager who'd been with the company for 18 months or less. And I was going in for meetings with the chief marketing officer, the head of public relations, and pitching them on why we needed to do this series. And, I don't know if I've ever been quite so nervous in my life, but again, you've got a good story and you pitch it and you give people reasons. And if they're reasonable, which they were, they're like, all right, give it a shot. And, their thing was like, look, the minute we start getting complaints from parents, you're done. And so, when it came to that, there were a few things that we toned back a little bit. I wish I had a copy of it here, but, just kind of funny little things like the first Howard Chaykin cover for the #1, I think it was the #1 issue, where it's Chuckles standing in the window, and there's, I think it's Erica Laten is sitting on the bed in a little short like cocktail dress. The original version of that, you could just see a little bit of her underwear. And that had to, that had to go, right? So her dress got a little bit longer, and, it was little things like that we had to do to just make sure that we wanted people focused on the story, right? We didn't want people getting upset about things that, may have ruffled some feathers, et cetera. So, but as we got going and we got deeper into it, I think we felt we could take some more risks, and that's as you see it develop, that we get a lot more. It does get grittier. It does get a little bit more intense. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's that's a lot of memories from that.
Can you talk about killing Cobra Commander?
Yeah,
because that's a big deal, and that was a big page turn surprise. So, So, whose idea, approvals, hemming and hawing?
It's really funny because there's 2 big moments, I think, in the Cobra series that involve a killing that we were a little bit nervous about. Certainly Cobra Commander was a big one. But the first one was Chuckles killing Jinx, executing Jinx. And I remember when the art first came in, and again, thinking back to that time and trying to be a bit careful, the art came in and it was very tame. It was very sort of slightly off panel, and it was a lot very silhouetted. And I knew that fans weren't going to believe it, right? This is Hasbro. Hasbro doesn't kill main characters, and they certainly don't kill them on panel. So my note back to the artists at that time was, we have to sell this. Like, you have to see him kill her, and there has to be no doubt that that's what actually just happened, because if that doesn't happen, his character arc makes no sense, right? Like that very moment is the big change for him, in terms of how far he's willing to go and how much he's really sold his soul to achieve his objectives. And we did, and the part that I always laughed about afterwards was that fans still didn't believe it. Like everywhere, every review I saw, it's like, well, obviously that didn't really happen. And it was really tough to try to get people to come around to the fact that, like, no, he really killed her. So then that, in a way that sets the stage for getting to the Cobra Commander moment. And, really that was planned early on because of the idea that we were going to eventually move into the story of who is Cobra Commander? What does that position mean? How long has it existed? How is it chosen? So the assassination of Cobra Commander obviously was key to triggering all the rest of that storytelling. And again, it was kind of a funny situation where the art came in, and it was more similar to when Jinx was executed, but it wasn't that huge, amazing spread, right? And I'll never forget going to talk to the head of the GI Joe brand at that time, guy named Michael Varecchia, who was he was a great guy to work with, and he and I had talked so much about this series, and I had really sold him on what we were doing, and when he looked at that that original art, he said, "I don't know, man. This looks like the play school version of killing Cobra Commander." So with that, it was sort of like, all right, we've got the go ahead to really knock it out of the park, and that you get that big splash page of that Blam, and yeah, that was exactly the experience that we were hoping people were going to get, was to turn that page and just be like, no way, I can't believe that just happened.
I think I made a little noise. I think it's sort of the, oops, wow, no, oh my gosh, wait, sort of all in one syllable, which is sort of a W-U-L-P word. Whoop.
Yep.
And there was no doubt, right? When I saw it, I thought,
yeah. Of course, then there was all the speculation. Well, it wasn't really Cobra Commander; it was a state, But I mean, that was fine too. Like that's the kind of debate and conversation you want to fuel. But I always thought it was funny that there was just this ingrained belief in readers of the GI Joe comics that there were things that Hasbro would simply never allow. And even if they happened, there had to be another explanation for it. It couldn't possibly be that Hasbro actually allowed that to happen, but we did, and the story is better for it.
And you said that at the outset of the IDW era, that Hasbro was a very different place to now. Are you able to put your finger on how it's changed over that sort of length of time?
I think, at that time it was still 2006. So you're talking about when I started, it was 2006, and that was before the first Transformers movie, about a year before the first Transformers movie. So Hasbro at that time was still very, very much a toy company, right? And then that was their focus was on making toys. Their focus was on making sure that, kids are happy, parents are happy. All the things that you do if you are a toy manufacturer that is targeting a under 12-year-old age group for the most part. We hadn't really moved at that point, either culturally or business wise, into that entertainment mindset of people of all ages enjoy and want to interact with our brands. Right now, certainly the comics had always attracted an older fan, but I just don't think that the company thought that much about it, because it was sort of a out of sight, out of mind. It doesn't cause trouble. It doesn't, it brings in a little bit of revenue. We're not going to really think that much about it. But then when the transition started happening under Brian Goldner's leadership towards, we are an entertainment company, and we, our brands are expressed in different ways to different people. That started to make, the perspective of how we tell stories evolve. And, I think that when you get past, say, 2010 to about 2020, that's really where you see that culture start to emerge at Hasbro of a bit more risk taking, a bit more interest in telling meaningful stories, and really pushing beyond the sort of simple execution of just toys.
Some of this is also, did you have any interaction with the Hub, the cable network, or E1, the big media company that Hasbro acquired? Because that seems to be very much in keeping with this decade of expanding to business and cultural storytelling. What about those two companies? How did you interact with them, or with meetings or brands?
Really closely. So I would say that I would actually say that I probably spent more time between 2010, when the Hub launched, and 2018, give or take, working with the people over at the hub and the studio, Hasbro Studios, even then with the brand teams. Certainly the brand teams were involved, but when it came to the focus of storytelling and what we were, character development, things like that, we tried where we could to make sure that we were complementing each other's work. So there was a lot of upfront discussions. I was in a lot of meetings where, the next season of whether it was Renegades or whether it was, Transformers Prime, My Little Pony, I was often in the room when they were talking about what the next season was going to look like, what beats were going to be covered. And that way I could go back and try and figure out where we were going to either stay away from if we didn't want to, bump up against that, or where it made sense, try to build some connective tissue there.
So specifically, there was no G.I. Joe Renegades comic book.
Right.
Might there have been?
I certainly think that had the series progressed, probably, yes.
But also it's not like the show launched and also 2 months later a comic book launched.
No.
So that was going to be hands off.
Yes, exactly. And part of the reason for that was that there was already, there was the movie, there was the Renegades, there's what we were doing in comics, which was at that point, we're telling three separate stories within the comic business. So I think it just felt that until Renegades got up to a critical mass of audience, we felt that it was best to just wait and see where it went.
And as a small comparison, but maybe making the same point, I think there were only 1 or 2 Transformers Prime comics that were original, and the rest were adaptations of the show using screen caps and word balloons.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You recently just shared a few kind of mementos on Facebook from your time at IDW. So I thought we're working with IDW. So I thought that this might sort of trigger a bit of interesting sort of conversation. So I've put on here a framed image of Baroness from the G.I. Joe Origins title. What can you tell us about this?
So, the Baroness has always been one of my favorite characters. And I always, I think that there's times when she's depicted in a really interesting light. And then there's other times when I think she comes across too much as just the femme fatale, one-dimensional type of character. And so for her origin story, I really wanted to make sure that we dug into this idea of her as a human being, but really with a lot of sociopathic tendencies. I mean, and to the point where I actually copied out the description of what a sociopath is in the DMV5 or whatever it is that we're up to, and sent that to the writer and said, this is who she is. Like, she is. Don't ask her for empathy; she's incapable of it. Right? So we really wanted to. I really wanted to explore that with her, and Ben Templesmith. He delivered just an amazing story. And I will tell you this, that when his art first came in, obviously I saw the script first, I read through it, I liked it, made a few minor changes, but nothing big. And then he started to illustrate it. And I'll tell you, when I saw that art come in and I saw the finished book, I remember saying to Andy Schmidt, let's do this as a silent issue. Let's just throw away the script. I mean, the script is great, and I don't want to insult Ben at all because it was a great script, but his art told such an amazing story that I just felt, let's just do it. Let's just do it as a silent issue. And, I got overruled on that, and that's fine. I think it's a fantastic issue. And I do think that there's some really great dialogue and character development in there. But I'll tell you, you can look through that book and never read a single balloon, and you will know exactly what that story is about. So, but yeah, I because I was so involved, that was one of the first comics early on that I was really involved with from the, in terms of digging into the story and looking at the art from a sort of the perspective of feeling for the first time that I had input that could be valuable, and not necessarily, I think I said in our last one that it's never a mandate, but I think I was starting to build my confidence to the point where I could say, like, I think this is something we should explore. I think this is something we should do. Maybe she should say this, that kind of thing. So when the issue came out, I bought a few of the original panels from Ben, and then I had them framed like this, which is the original script, the original art, and then the page from the final comic.
For people who maybe didn't catch our first interview with you, I think I asked you and you agreed, despite your different titles at Hasbro, you were basically an editor, like a story editor. So if a comics publisher has a writer and an editor, you were the Hasbro editor, sort of one step further or one step up, not just making sure that nothing got a character wrong or misrepresented the brand, but also representing your point of view and where the brand could go in those years. But you also were more involved with some issues, with some launches, and less involved with others, either because as time went on, you were promoted sort of a little past that, or because some books were sort of smooth sailing. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. And I think, probably the biggest one of those, I think the area where I would say I was probably least involved on a day-to-day basis, although, I certainly still read the manuscripts and would check the art as they came through. But like with Larry Hama's once we relaunched Real American Hero, as far as I was concerned, there's not much that I can add to that, right? I mean, Larry has a very distinctive style. He's been doing it long, almost as long as I've been alive. And I think what I wanted to make sure was that he was telling the story that he wanted to tell, versus the story that Hasbro wanted him to tell. And, I think I've seen a few early interviews with him where he mentions like, oh, and then I had to put this in because it was the new toy and, Hasbro wanted it in there so that it would get advertised. And, I didn't want him to ever feel that kind of constraint. And, nor would I ever mandate any kind of toy advertising in the rest of the lines. But with Larry, I felt like, he's earned his right to tell the story that he wants to tell. And, so I gave him certainly a bit more free reign than most areas of the publishing. But again, like I said, I think in our last interview, I trust our creators, right? If you're not going to trust your creators, then don't bother. As far as I'm concerned.
That's an interesting parallel, because Larry Hama, best known as a writer, and then second and third best known as a comics artist and a comics editor, has talked about his editing philosophy, because he edited the Conan books and he edited a bunch of stuff at Marvel and briefly at DC. And he has said, as editor, I think you hire people for their taste and then you get out of their way.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah.
Can you think about instances on the ARA book over the course of that almost 150 extra issues that we got after the Marvel run, that were, had the most sort of back and forth with you? I guess the intuitively it would feel like possibly the death and then subsequent return of Snake Eyes might have the most focus.
Yeah, I mean, I think really the most focus was, certainly there was, the idea of the death of Snake Eyes. But, I think to an extent, I always thought of that as, well, it's a comic book death, right? I mean, everybody knows that main characters die from time to time and then they come back. And so it wasn't as much that, but certainly the new characters that Larry has been creating more recently, those required a bit more scrutiny, just to make sure that, they were within the context of where we want the brand to be and where we think the story should go. But, I think his creation of Dawn was amazing. I really love that character. And then I was really enjoying his introduction of characters like Sherlock and Molto and, a few others that I just thought were, he was bringing a contemporary feel to the book that not just by the characters, but by their specialties, right? It was bringing G.I. Joe into the present day in a way that really, to me, felt organic. But again, that would be the area where he would submit the concept, the rough sketch of what the character would look like. He actually would submit file cards on how he saw them being designed. And, so that was an area where I had to really, look into those things, get some internal approvals on a few of them, and then push that forward.
So the natural follow-up question, Michael, is how hard were you pushing to get some of those new characters made as action figures with the brand team, or why not?
I would say fairly early in my career at Hasbro, I realized that was not a conversation that was ever going to go very well for me. So I think more recently there's been an openness to adapting some of those characters into action figures, and I would love to see some of them come to light at this point. But yeah, it can be a long road.
The idea here is that you're publishing, you are not on the action figure team, and the action figure team gets to decide, and their marketing is telling them sort of what they should make, or they get to creatively decide what should happen next.
Yeah, that's accurate. Yeah.
Was there much discussion? Transformers for I forget, a year or two or three around Combiner Wars, there were action figure toys that came with IDW comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Was there, and I know that for some years there wasn't much of a G.I. Joe toy line or any, but how much of a discussion was there in some of these years of packing a comic with G.I. Joe toys?
Not much.
Can you say why?
Well, I do think that for a good period, to what you just said, for a while, G.I. Joe wasn't necessarily dormant, but there wasn't quite as much of a push behind the action figure line and the brand overall. There were some years where really comics were driving the G.I. Joe brand almost entirely, right? So, and then I think when they launched the classified line, I feel that those are conversations that probably would happen if I was still there, but and I hope that they do without me there, but I wouldn't rule it out. I certainly think now more than ever, it makes sense between the success of Skybound, the fact that they've expanded their audience, and certainly the excitement and passion for the classified line. I think it makes a lot of sense.
And we've not seen much of this beyond an initial press release, but Todd McFarlane's Page Puncher line has been announced in conjunction with G.I. Joe. So before too very long, we might expect something to be launched which has both comics and toys together.
Yeah, that was actually one of the first and last deals that I approved as the creative lead on the G.I. Joe brand right before leaving. So yeah, those will be fun when they come out.
Presumably, since they're not out, there's nothing more you can say about them.
That's right.
Okay. Well, if anyone at Hasbro is listening, I feel like a boxed set with 3 or 4 of these new Joe characters and a custom Skybound Larry Hama comic sure sounds like an expensive, but a home run. An expensive.
I'd buy one.
I
don't think I'm on the comp list anymore.
Do you? Do you? On the screen, we've got again an image that you shared. Are you able to talk to what it is that we're looking at the moment, and how that all came about?
Yeah. So you can see the date on the letter, 2010. So I'd only been heading up comics for about just under 2 years at that point. And that was not long after the first time that I met Larry Hama in person, actually. It was at Comic-Con, and we were, I think, at a panel. Yeah, we were on a panel together with IDW, and he had a signing at the Hasbro booth right after that. And, certainly you guys know how difficult it is to get from the panel rooms back onto the main floor and get anywhere in any kind of if there's a deadline. So he asked me, can you navigate me to the Hasbro booth? And so we walked in together, and we, got to chat a little bit. And afterwards, after the show, just dropped him a line, said thanks for everything. And he, he said, I would love to get a couple of the exclusives that Hasbro had for SDCC, and I was sort of, it was one of those things where I was like, they didn't give you them, I just sort of assumed that would have happened, given that he did the big signing and everything, and so I managed to track down a few and sent them down to him, and I didn't expect it's for me that was just, of course, you're going to give Larry or anybody who comes and does a signing at the booth, anybody that helps promote the company, why not give a little bit of swag? So I didn't expect anything back. And then, a few weeks later, I get this in the mail, and it's this really nice note from Larry, along with the original sketch that he did for issue 156. So I've kept that all this time. It's actually it's been in my safe for quite a while to keep it protected, but pretty soon I'm going to get it framed up the way that the Baroness covers are.
Right.
With a 3 windows cut in the mat or 4?
I think it'll be 3.
This could be a very long.
Yeah, it'll be 3 because it'll because there's you can see 4 there, but one of them is just the sketch cover. That's so I'll probably do the letter, the original art, and then the color version. Right. Yeah.
Another thing that I've picked out. Okay, there was the Virgin Arts. I was navigating to this one. It's a cover that you've highlighted as a couple of times as your favorite from the IDW run. Yeah. It's ARA 225 variant, Valentine's Day variant cover by Agnes Garbowska. Can you talk to this cover and why it sticks out for you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I absolutely love Agnes and her art. I think she just brings such a playful and cute feel to anything she does, and she's done some amazing work for My Little Pony. Obviously, that would probably be more obvious, but also actually for Transformers, she's done some really amazing covers. But I think the reason that I love this one so much is first just because it is adorable and it's really playful. But I also love that it just brings me back to being in elementary school when you got your boxed Valentines and you filled them out for everybody in class, and you had your little paper bag that you filled up with the ones that you got, and so, I mean, all of those things, I think the nostalgia of both that experience and the artwork itself, and, even just the sentiment, you don't have to say a thing, Valentine. It's just like, she just knocked it out of the park. So, yeah, I think, check out her. I know she's, she's got a Instagram page. I know she's on LinkedIn. She's on Facebook. I mean, check out her art. She's fabulous. She really is.
If I can add one more thing about this cover, it's not just that it is a funny, cute drawing. It's that it really is an illustration. It's a drawing that tells a story. It's not just like spot art, because both of these characters are acting very much in character, despite being cute and sort of kidified. So yeah. Scarlet is loving Snake Eyes unconditionally, and Snake Eyes isn't reacting.
Right.
And I don't mean like Snake Eyes is mean. I mean,
yeah.
In the comic, we've talked about Mark, like he doesn't speak, and it's not that he can't, it's that he doesn't. He also can't, but he doesn't use sign language. He doesn't write notes very much. He's sort of a blank slate, and he's making eye contact with us. So there's this added layer that sort of we're projecting sort of how wonderful or odd this is for him.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. It's a great image.
The other one that I'd highlighted here was your recent post about this Cobra special issue, which was kind of a mirror issue where the front and last page mirror one another, and so on into the middle of the book. And almost you described it almost like the writer pitched it as, I want to do an issue like that mirror issue from Watchmen, but better. Which is a heck of an ambition.
Yeah, and remind you, this is Mike Costa, right? And like I said, he has an amazing natural talent. He's a fantastic storyteller, but he was pretty new to the genre and to the business. And to have somebody who, I mean, we might be the same age, but you kind of get that sort of like, look at this punk kid coming in and being like, I'm going to out Watchmen. I'm like, oh, really? Yeah, good luck. And I remember that conversation really well, because he was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the whole mirror image, and it's going to be, and I think, the one part that I learned recently is that I think that the final pitch was a conversation between him and Andy Schmidt that got to the point where they decided that it was literally going to be everything that was mirrored, right? It was going to be the panel, the panel structure is what is mirrored in Fearful Symmetry in Watchmen, right? It's just like, if you go out, it's like the panels all are mirrored, but that's it, right? I mean, that's it. And so Costa and Schmidt came up with this idea, like it's going to be the panels, the artwork, the speech bubbles, the sentiment, basically, like every single page is going to be a precise mirror of its corresponding page. And, you hear that. And again, it's sort of like when somebody says, I don't know, I'm going to out Dr. Seuss, and then they turn in some rhyme and it's so clunky and awful that you just wish that they had never read Dr. Seuss, let alone tried to imitate him. So that was sort of my thing was, look, I'll let you try and I wish you luck, but I don't believe you're going to be able to pull it off. And when you don't, I'm going to cancel it, right? I mean, we're not putting out a book that's crap and that people are going to make fun of us for trying to do something so ambitious and failing. So either you succeed or it doesn't happen. And then you got to write a new book. That's what he delivered. And I'll tell you, I think it's remarkable. Like, he really delivered what he said he was going to. So
I have two reactions to this. One is that it's been many years and comic book covers have been so interesting in the last 10, 15 years. I had sort of forgotten until seeing this JPEG right now. A G.I. Joe cover had never looked like this until the Cobra miniseries and this special. And now it's like, well, yeah, it's sort of graphic designy and there's a lot of negative space and it's sort of it's a collection of images and and it's squares, but this is really striking and unusual. And, if we think about cover imagery and marquee imagery for G.I. Joe in the 80s and 90s, whether it's action figures and vehicles or Find Your Fate novels or the board game, whatever it is, it's like a character and an explosion and the logo, or maybe it's a bunch of characters and a mountain and the logo. Yeah. And if it's a comic, it's someone in a jetpack, and then you have something like this. And my other recollection is I remember reading it and turning to the last page and thinking, oh wow, and this sort of abstract feeling, which is there are all these G.I. Joe fans out there. But compared to the larger population of comics fans or some bigger brands like Batman, there aren't that many of us. And how lucky we are that we get such a well-constructed, not just narrative, but in the symmetry, from a formalist perspective. And I think I'm sort of irked that there are all these dormant G.I. Joe fans out there, kids from the 80s. Well, they know Tomax and Zaymont from the cartoon, or they had the toy. It's like, if only you knew how good this comic was. And if I started to tell you, you wouldn't believe me. And sort of being a little frustrated, like, oh man, I wish more people more dormant Joe fans were reading this comic, and they would be blown away by how sophisticated it is.
Yeah.
Not just gritty, but sophisticated.
Yeah, agreed.
Absolutely. It's it speaks volumes to the fact that such an ambitious experiment, and the time taken to craft something like this versus what some people might expect from a brand like G.I. Joe, which is you're going to have some people in a fight and they're going to punch each other and there's going to be an explosion and Cobra Commander's going to go at the end, curse you, Joes. and then he'll run away, and then it'll be the next adventure, next issue.
That's the cartoon with lasers and they all jump out of the planes. No. Mm-hmm. There's this comic, but there are 3 comics and they're all different.
Yeah.
This comic, it's like the show 24. Like, what?
Yeah. I know. Yeah, it was really different, and yeah.
Can you talk about the Larry Hama Real American Hero? Somewhere in the first couple of years, it was very small on the barcode on the back cover, but it had a mature readers label, recommended for mature readers, which at the time irked me, and now I sort of. It's no big deal. Bags and Boards or eBay listings. Everyone's only seeing the front cover. Do you remember that discussion?
I do.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and again, that it really dates back to those early days of launching with relaunching with IDW, and like I said, Hasbro was really, and rightly so, concerned about their primary consumers, right, which are parents of children. And I think what they were worried about, and it's not an unreasonable concern. It's an unreasonable concern if you know the comic book business and the comic book industry, and the audience, I would say. But it's not if you don't know that clearly. So, I think from their perspective, it was what if, some grandmother goes into the shop and picks up G.I. Joe Cobra or G.I. Joe Real American Hero by Larry Hama and gives it to their 6-year-old because they remember comics when they were little and they liked them and thought this would be cute. And then they get home and they read it, and, there's violence, and there's, there might be a little bit of, inappropriate suggestion in there for that age group. And, and suddenly we're getting flooded with complaints from parents, from grandparents, from consumer protection groups, et cetera, that are like, wow, you sort of misled your audience into thinking that this was a kid's product. And so I think when we were talking about doing things like especially the Chuckles story, the Cobra story, but even some of the things that because Larry really did want to be more realistic. He wanted to show what these characters go through and what experiences they have that are, they're not superheroes. They're real human beings that are dealing with these things. That was sort of the compromise, was we'll let you do those things, but you have to put a warning on the cover. So, I felt it was, in some cases, it was maybe not necessarily. I don't think we ever really got to the point that it required a mature rating or a, parental advisory, if you will. But from Hasbro's perspective, I can understand it, because if you're used to marketing mostly to the parents of 8-year-olds or 6-year-olds, then that's a valid concern. So, I thought it was I think that we lost an audience for it. I mean, maybe a few people here and there, but I don't think enough that it would have damaged the books or the reach. It might have had the intended effect of putting off some people that might have read it otherwise. But, again, like I said, I think it was a fair compromise to make with a company that wasn't quite ready to go full bore into that kind of storytelling.
And the label did disappear a few years in, and
Yeah.
I don't feel like the book got softer or harder when the label disappeared.
Yeah, part of it was also realizing that if you put it on everything and it's not merited, then you're actually creating the scenario where you might create what you were trying to avoid, which is get somebody to say, it says parental advisory on it, but it's not. and then you get a book like Cobra, and oh well, maybe it was, maybe it should have been. So
I had another IDW behind the scenes question, which I just recently found out about this last week. Which there was this short. So in the news at the moment again, and in the air is Cobra La, everyone's favorite faction of Cobra, and there was a short story published in G.I. Joe yearbook. Which I think was written by Tommy Lee Edwards.
2019
yearbook,
or
which was sort of set 2019, I think it was, and it was sort of set after G.I. Joe the movie, and it seemed to be this kind of guerrilla war between G.I. Joe and Cobra La, and that was all we saw of it. But I understand that there was actually almost 4 issues, sort of not maybe written, but sort of sketched out as an intended sort of spin-off from that story. Are you able to share the inside scoop of what happened with that particular planned title?
I don't have a very strong recollection of it, which probably means that it wasn't controversial. My guess is that it probably was that IDW decided to just go in a different direction. I certainly don't remember any conversation where it was like, you can't do this, or we don't want to go with that story. And I would, if we did, because it was so rare that we did. So I think it's probably was a scheduling issue more than anything else. That's my best guess.
Yeah, possibly.
And
if they're going to go,
sorry, no, that's not that exciting, but that's
well,
if they're going to go for one more book, is it going to be this one? Yeah.
Right. To the point you made earlier about how many versions or continuities of G.I. Joe at that point, you have Hama's Real American Hero, you have maybe another movie coming down the pipeline, you have the Hasbro-verse, Revolution-verse over in IDW, and ultimately there was Saturday Morning Adventures, which was a very comparable product, if not story.
Yeah. I do think it was pretty much just simple as that. Yeah.
I was going to sort of move on to sort of just the end of IDW and sort of how that moved to the Skybound era. But was there anything else that sort of either of you wanted to explore about IDW era?
I want to jump back to 2008 if I can. So IDW reprinted all of the Marvel issues, and the reproduction on half of them or a third of them is good. The first 50 issues, that work had already been done by a different studio, because Marvel had reprinted those first 50 issues around 2001, 2002. And I was talking to Daryl DePriest 6 months ago, and he remembered a point where a whole bunch of film, which is the full-size 11x17 photographic negatives of original art, right? This is before scanners.
Yeah.
So the way that Marvel used to, or DC or anyone before Photoshop and scanners, they would take a picture of every page, and then they could make a printer's plate from that to do a reprint, because the original art went back to the artist, or it was lost, or so as IDW reprinted more and more issues, the reproduction on them, the actual sort of fidelity of the black, the actual outlines, on some of them, it's not great. Like some of the special missions issues, it looks like IDW's subcontractor like scanned a printed comic and stripped the color and then recolored it and made a digital file, and they could do a new reprinting of it. But as an example, issue 84 is one of the ones that came in a 2-pack with some action figures in 2008. And so Hasbro did that work, right? Made that new master, did that remastering. And the reproduction on that issue in the actual Hasbro edition with the new cover is great. So do you have any recollections of discussions internally or with IDW about reproduction and sort of quality or quality control?
So, you mentioned film. If Marvel still owns the film to those original comics, they are not aware of it, because we have actually reached out to them and asked, do you have this? Is it something that we could at least borrow or, buy, etc. And, after what I believe was a fairly exhaustive look, they cannot locate that original film anymore. So I assume that at some point, it probably sadly was discarded. Maybe hopefully some collector out there picked it up out of a dumpster or something like that, and someday we'll see revealed that somebody actually has all the film, although they'd have to have a big warehouse for it. But so it did get to a point where we had IDW had to, as you said, resort to scans of actual printed copies and then remaster those. Using the original film is literally no longer an option, unfortunately. So the issue from Hasbro, either maybe they spent a bit more time ensuring that they were really touching up some of the areas that needed it, or they had access to the film for a short period in 2008, and then it was subsequently lost. But that was one of the things that I think it's going to be one of those things that everybody wishes still existed, but I think it's gone.
Okay. I mean, part of why I bring this up is that there are collectors out there who own the original artwork, and if a publisher is going to reprint a 22-page comic, it may not be all that helpful if collectors have access to 3 of the pages and can email scans, right? Then 13% of the book, the reprint, looks great, and the rest of it doesn't, and that actually might be worse than if the whole thing sort of doesn't look great. But I remember when IDW was starting those special missions reprints, Herb Trimpe was selling his originals on eBay, and I remember thinking, someone just ask him or his agent to scan these, because there were pretty big JPEGs on the eBay listings, and I got 2 of them. But I've been mentally gearing up to a medium length email to Skybound about sort of putting out a call to all the collectors, like, please send us your scans. Okay, well that answers, because it from what DePriest said, it sounds like some films did come to Hasbro, and Hasbro was able to make use of perhaps some of them, but the memory was old, and it was such a strange memory, because it's not about toys, it's not about new comics, it's this very particular artifact of old comics.
Right. I'll tell one quick, just amusing anecdote that I have about film, and then I do have one other thing I want to just say about IDW before we move on, Mark. But my first job in publishing, I was 23 years old or something like that. I was a rights assistant, and my job was to order duplicate film so that foreign publishers could print books. And I'll tell you, it sounds, I don't know, maybe it doesn't sound, it was complicated. Like, I mean, that film, right? So you think about, at that time I worked in children's books, right? So the film, it was sheets and sheets of this kind of like vellum, right? And so it was, when you shipped it, it was about that thick, right? All the different layers, each color had its own layer, each text had its, black text had its own layer, and then all of that had to be duplicated, and it was expensive. So part of what part of what a rights director back then had to negotiate was the cost of the film duplication, which could be $6,000 or $7,000 to create duplicate film for a book. And then it would ship, and it would weigh a ton, because you'd have these, 11 by 17 sheets of plastic that are almost an inch thick when they're all layered up on each other. It weighed a ton. It was amazing. But anyway, so yeah, that's how books used to be made. And we still in the industry call it a black plate change when you just change the text, because at that time the plate with the black ink on it, was a separate thing, and you could lift that off and then put in Spanish or French or whatever other language you were going to replace it with. But anyway, that's just a funny aside from the from my early days of publishing. And then the other thing I would just say, you brought up Cobra Law, and Skybound wanting to include that. I would say if it weren't for Mike Costa's run on Cobra, I never would have allowed that, because again, his ability to take kind of goofy characters and make them compelling and either really interesting or in some cases really scary. Like I think of Crocmaster. Crocmaster in Cobra is a terrifying character. So I think that when Skybound said, we really want to use that, my first instinct was, no, we're not going that route. We're just not going to do that. And then they're like, no, we're gonna make it scary. We're gonna make it cool, and it's gonna be a really good part of the story. I'm like, all right, well, I've seen people say the same thing and actually pull it off, so let's go for it.
I might be sort of guessing what Mark's sort of question about the end of IDW is, but maybe it's sort of every question phrased as one broad question, which is, and Mark, stop me if I'm getting ahead of you. How was the timeline of the end of A Real American Hero changed? Was any of the story changed in advance of the series being able to continue? Like, I thought someone said to us in one of our interviews after we finished recording, oh, actually they wanted to go to issue 304. Can you talk about any changes, knowing that something big and different was on the horizon?
Yeah, there were, I think originally there was, you never really certain precisely what a new publisher is going to want to engage in and what stories they're going to want to tell for a very short period of time. And I mean, probably not more than a couple of weeks. There was just a little uncertainty, probably more on my part, Hasbro's part, than on Skybound's part, as to whether they wanted to continue Real American Hero. And that, like I said, did not come from them. They didn't say, well, we're thinking about it. I think it was more just, well, I don't know. Like, we've talked about the news, we talked about the new stuff and what they want to do new. We haven't really had a conversation of what they want to do with Real American Hero and with Larry. So, at that point, I think that with the idea that maybe Real American Hero was going to end, there was probably an interest on IDW's part, and I'm sure Larry's part, to give it an ending, a really solid, like, this is the end. This is how we're wrapping it all up, and probably felt that couldn't be done just in the 300 issue, with the 300th issue. And of course, by the time 300 came out or was written, we knew that it was going to continue, right? So then now suddenly it's got a cliffhanger, and similar to like people not believing Jinx. I remember a lot of commentary of just like, I can't believe it ended in a cliffhanger. Like, are you kidding me? Like, we're never going to get another Real American Hero comic, and that's how it ends. But of course, we all knew that Larry had already written 301 and 302, right? So, but yeah, that was a very brief, moment in time when there was a little bit of uncertainty about where things were going, and we wanted to be sure one way or another that both Larry and the fans got the ending to Real American Hero that they deserved, that they all deserved, right? So, but then happily that didn't have to even be considered. So.
And bringing back Snake Eyes, I mean, there's been a bit of speculation about that. Is that partly putting the toys back in the toy box so that he was a character that could be used by the new publisher, or was it just the story that Larry wanted to tell?
Just the story Larry wanted to tell.
This is interesting because, everyone's going to say back in 213 after he died, and Larry said several times in the letters page and maybe at a convention, no, he's really dead. But I also think he said this to me sort of outside of, just walking around. And so I suspect that he changed his mind later as opposed to fooled everyone this whole time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have to remember, I always just take Larry's word for it that, he doesn't know what's happening on page 19 when he's writing page 18. So the fact that he initially said that Snake Eyes was really dead and now Snake Eyes is coming back, that fits right in with the way that he tells stories. It evolves and he goes where it goes.
He also understands, marketing. You'd have to be a little savvy if you've written a comic like G.I. Joe for so long, because you have to follow, what the toy company is directing. But the genesis of Don Marino is a costume that people can cosplay.
Yeah.
And I think that's really fascinating and kind of funny. But that's not something that someone would think of in 1982 or 1992. Right. And so I can also imagine from a marketing perspective, okay, so storytelling, Larry takes Snake Eyes off the board and brings in these other two characters who can both fill that space, but also make it different and bigger. And he can always do flashbacks. And then maybe from a marketing perspective, he thinks, with a new publisher, there are going to be a bunch of new readers coming in. Maybe they're going to just want the original Snake Eyes. Well, I brought people back before, I can bring them back. And so this might be, giving the reader what they want. Because people would show up and then, wait, he's dead, and there's these other two people.
Yeah.
Mark, back to you.
Right. Yes. So, sort of the rumors about G.I. Joe and Transformers ending at IDW sort of started around about December 2021, January 2022. I think the news came out. The last issue was at the end of that year, December 2022. Summer 23, we sort of find out what's going on with the first issue of G.I. Joe hitting a year after it ends at IDW in December 2023. So we first get wind of all of this kind of happening, sort of, as I say, sort of around about January 2022. How long had it been sort of in the air, percolating prior to that point?
I'm trying to think back. It's a long ways. So the IDW contract, we would have been probably talking about either renewal or finding a new home. I want to say probably by September of 2021, we would have had proposals in-house and considering which direction we were going to go. And then certainly by January of 2022, we knew who the new publisher was and what direction we were going to go in. And we're at that point, we're actively planning the way that it was going to, which stories were going to be told, how it was going to be launched, that whole thing was all coming out in that first quarter of 2022. So it was a long time to pretend we didn't know anything.
Yeah, it's because as Joshua Williamson sort of tells it from the Skybound side of things, it's been very much a property that's kind of been on their radar, their wish list, and sort of thinking about ideas of what would we do if we had G.I. Joe and Transformers sort of long in advance of this, and yeah, he kind of got the call about actually, this, it looks like this thing is going to be happening. I think it's sort of a good few years into sort of those internal discussions, and it sounds like they prepared a kind of a hell of a kind of a pitch pack to you guys of what they could be doing, and we've in public domain we've got I think just one element of that, which was some Daniel Warren Johnson arts, which was part of that pack. But I've heard other names in the mix of some art that was created that we've not actually publicly seen that sounded pretty exciting. So, can you talk about a little bit about kind of that process and the reaction to kind of the kind of ideas and direction that they were sharing?
Yeah, I think, it's definitely true that Skybound and Robert Kirkman in particular had been interested in these brands for quite a while. I think, and I forgive me if I already told this story in the last time we met, but I think it was probably, well, it was certainly pre-pandemic, so it must have been 2018 or 2019. I was at San Diego Comic-Con, and Chris Ryle from IDW came by, and he was like, Robert Kirkman wants to talk to you, right? And I was like, that's weird. But all right. That's cool. And I said, well, when? And he said, well, if you've got time now. And, I was just at the Hasbro booth, I think. I was like, okay. So I walked over, and, there he is at the, at the Image booth, and he's doing he's literally in the middle of a signing, right? There's lines of people, lined up to get The Walking Dead signed. And he's sitting there, and he looks over, and I'm just standing there, and he waves me up, right? And stops the signing, right? And all these people, all these poor fans are just like, yes, this is so exciting. And this weird dude, me, walks up on stage and we start talking. He's like, oh, I'm really interested in these brands. And it was just this sort of surreal moment because, I admittedly am slightly starstruck myself, but also I've got all these people like, who the hell is that guy? Like, do we need his autograph too? No, you don't, trust me, you don't need mine. But it was really funny. And so, yeah, there was a passion there that I could tell. And so when we put the RFP out for G.I. Joe and Transformers, I wasn't surprised at all when Skybound reached out right away and said, we're making a proposal. There, as you can see, the amount of effort that they put in, both from just a resource standpoint of like actually going out and getting concept art done, story arcs considered, different. It was phenomenal. Like, honestly, they just, what they delivered in terms of a proposal was exactly what you would hope for if you are, representing a brand that has been there and done that. Like, it's like, how do you reinvent something to an extent that, with a brand that's been around for 40, 50 years, and their proposal was exactly what you would hope for. So it was kind of like right from the start, it was like, this is the team to beat. And it just kind of kept getting better from there. And I would say, if you think what you've seen so far is good, you haven't seen anything yet.
What a tease.
You said RFP. Is that request for a pitch?
Request for proposal. Yeah.
Request for proposal.
Yeah.
May I ask, did other companies or entities besides IDW and Skybound propose?
Yeah, there were, I want to say we got 5 separate proposals in.
Wow.
Yeah.
And presumably IDW did propose to keep.
Yes. Yes.
Sort of gobsmacked by that story. 'Cause I forgot my question. Also, I just read Duke #2 this morning, and I'm thinking about Tom Riley's art and Jordi Bolaire's colors. And we're not recording that episode right now, so I can't say 4 times in a row how great they are. But I'm looking at this Johnson art, which I hadn't actually seen. I had my question.
Okay.
Okay, so G.I. Joe and Transformers are in the same universe in this new comics storytelling.
Mhm.
And they seem to be connecting with toys. There are these 2 packs, crossovers, and then there's also Energon references in some of the classified figures. And there's this crossover in the Renegade deck building game expansion. And then there's a little Easter egg in the last Transformers movie. How concerted is this, or how sort of happenstance? Yeah, coincidental is it?
That, I'm afraid, is a question I can't answer.
That's fair.
If I could answer it, I still couldn't. But particularly, now that I'm kind of on the outside looking in, I wouldn't want to speak to Hasbro's strategies and
Understood
planning. Yeah.
But we have noticed what an amazing coincidence these five. And I want to give credit where credit's due. This is Josh Eggebeen pointed this out to me in the summer by rattling off that list. So every time I say it and people think I'm smart, it's Josh Eggebeen who collated that.
Was there a specific kind of like almost mission statement around the relaunch about what Skybound was going to be doing and how that was, different to what had come before?
I think what impressed me most about their pitch, in addition, to the artwork and the concepts that they came through, was a genuine interest in expanding the audience, right? I mean, that really was we are gonna make comics that people who liked G.I. Joe but haven't followed it in 20 years, or saw a Transformers movie once and thought it was cool but haven't thought about it since, 12-year-old kids, we are gonna make stories that are going to expand the audience. That is particularly at that time. I mean, that was my job. My job was to expand audiences, right? It's like reach as many people as you can with these stories. And, I didn't say that when we put out the RFP. I didn't say make it an all ages, all audiences pitch. They came to that themselves. And, when you look at the numbers that they've sold so far, certainly seems like they're on the right track. So that was really I think the part that really resonated the most with me.
Is there anything you can say? So we haven't said Void Rivals yet. We haven't said those two words yet in this interview. And at the moment, it's a little quiet because we're between issues, or we're between arcs, right? They're taking a month or two off before the next issue comes out, and before the collection of the first arc. And it is so definitely connected to Transformers with character appearances thus far. Can you talk sort of broadly about Void Rivals, Kirkman writing it, how it was defined in the pitch, or sort of what you see as potential for it? Because this new universe, this proposal, is really different than anything we've seen before, because it mixes this other it's not a brand yet, but this other brand.
Yeah, that was part of the pitch from the very start. And, Robert really sold that as the idea that we are going to surprise people. We're going to come out with this new Robert Kirkman property, and people are going to get all excited. And then at the very end, you're going to see a Transformers. And, again, part of my job is to be skeptical. So, my first thought was, you are never going to keep that secret, right? I mean, it's a great idea. I love it, but there is no chance that you're going to keep that secret. And, and certainly I think within the industry, like if you ask people that work in comic book companies, they'll say, whether it's true or not, they'll say, well, we knew that was going to happen. Like we knew that Void Rivals was actually going to be the kickoff of the Transformers. Maybe some people did and some people didn't, but I'll tell you, the fans didn't. Like I think that 99% of people were surprised when they turned that page and Jetfire was there, right? So again, it was remarkable that secret managed to be kept from, at least from the public, the people who are most important, in my opinion, when it comes to something like that. But yeah, it was conceived of from the start, and and graciously, Robert Kirkman said, Void Rivals belongs to Hasbro. So it's copyright Hasbro as well. So it's all part of that universe. And to your point, Tim, it's maybe it's not a brand yet, but it certainly could grow into one.
I think we all, it was already sort of something that we understood, because there have been, Walking Dead aside, there have been a couple Kirkman launches since then, like Oblivion Song. Like, he's writing a book, someone great is drawing it, goes for 30 or 60 issues. There's a bunch of collections. Inevitably, there'll be a compendium with all of it in one book. And I think everyone had a sense of how sort of reasonably small or big something like Void Rivals, as the next Kirkman post Walking Dead, it's not like it was some Invincible spinoff while the Amazon show was running. This was just the next sort of medium thing. So to have that now just be a Hasbro entity, it's such fascinating uncharted territory, because I think we're all, to a lesser or greater extent, imagining ahead. Well, maybe in 15 years, Paramount and like Bay Films are making a Void Rivals movie, or maybe there's on the Hasbro YouTube channel, 35 like mini episodes of a Void Rivals stop motion show from the Void Rivals toys that Hasbro, and then sort of that's what's fascinating. And then what's also fascinating and weird is G.I. Joe has always had sci-fi and fantasy tendencies, right? And people say realistic, and I think G.I. Joe is actually grounded. I don't think G.I. Joe is realistic. And I'll slip up and say that R word, but look at 1982. There's a lot of stuff in there that's not realistic. And but it is now so much, not quite yet, because Duke just saw one Transformer kick his plane and that's it. But and here I am defeating my own argument, because Cobra Law traces back to 1980, 87. But it is such a different take, because it's got this sort of 1/3 of the triangle is this pre-brand that is all new. And it's not like when IDW or Devil's Due started their G.I. Joe comics, there was other spinoff. It's like the Lifeguards, or like some astronauts from Brazil. It's like, they're not G.I. Joe, but they'll be connected later. Right. And then also the Joes are just running around with alien robots now, and alien bounty hunters, and an alien Romeo and Juliet story. I guess there's no question there. I'm just sort of drawing.
I don't know, but I do want to read that Lifeguard spinoff.
Well, but when I get the license, I'm going to launch G.I. Joe and Transformers with this new unknown third thing about lifeguards.
Okay.
Back to you, Mark.
I was going to say, you then had this big launch at San Diego this past summer. You sort of chaired a panel, moderated a panel with all of the creatives there as well. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about your San Diego experience and what it was like having this this large launch of which it was pretty much the first that we'd started to hear details of exactly what Skybound's plans were for all of these properties that we love so much.
Yeah, San Diego is one of those for that year, last year, was sort of like this huge relief, because at that point we've been holding those secrets for so long, and constantly just worried that something was going to leak, or somebody that knew something was going to say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and to sort of finally be stating there publicly with everybody and saying, yeah, this is what we're doing, and how it's going to go, it was fun. It was a relief. I think, well, at least since 2008, it's the first time we've ever had a comic focused panel at the Hasbro booth itself. which, for me was, that was a big deal because, when you work for a gigantic entertainment toy manufacturing company that makes billions of dollars on the things that you don't do and makes a few $1 million on the things that you do, it's like, it's easy to just sort of be overlooked when it comes to like these kinds of things because Hasbro's focus at Comic-Con is making sure people are interested in the toys and making sure they're interested in the big budget movies and TV shows and things like that. So it felt like we had really arrived on the stage, literally and figuratively, to be there, to actually be a scheduled event on the main stage at the Hasbro booth. It was fun because I didn't know at all what to expect getting those four guys together. There's Larry up there and Daniel Warren Johnson, of course, Robert Kirkman, is gonna, he's a great just presence in any kind of public setting. And then Sean, the EIC over there. You just don't know what it's going to be like, but the banter that just naturally developed between the four of them was hilarious. I mean, it was just flat out hilarious. It was just great. And, it was really, it was a fun time and to see the crowd of people that were all, in the audience waiting and excited. And then, I think it was the next day or the day before when we did the actual Skybound panel that revealed a lot of what was coming and handed out the ash can of Transformers One. It was just the enthusiasm it was really exciting. So it probably ranks as one of my top 5 SDCCs of my career. And I think I've been to, 17 of them. So
Wow.
Pretty good.
This photo, I was thinking of a word with the description you were just giving, superstars. And, I'm always trying to convince people that G.I. Joe, and to a lesser extent Transformers, but that this brand is as awesome as you sort of remember it is, or that it sort of is reaching its potential, or it is as fun and cool as I say it is. No, just read this story or just watch this show or just, play with this toy. And it's one thing to have a great comic or to read an exciting press release, but to see, an editor may not be famous, but there's that writer, executive producer, there's that writer artist, there's that Hasbro guy, and and what I like about this photo is that I've always wanted this brand to get its due again. And there have been many wonderful creative decisions and business decisions in the last bunch of years, but as you have referred, there is a lot of resources and a lot of energy being poured into it right now. And I feel like the people making it, the people approving it, and now the audience they're sort of catching up with where a smaller faction of us were the last couple years. Like, yeah, G.I. Joe's the stuff.
Yeah.
A Transformers book can look that bonkers.
Yeah.
I'll lift my hat to Philip Donnelly, who took this particular image that I'm sharing on screen at the moment. And I thought they had just sort of prompted by this picture, as well as we got kind of the creatives, Larry Hama, Daniel Warren Johnson there, looking like a real rock and roll creative. And an absolute star of the industry at the moment. But we got Kirkman, who is writing Void Rivals, but also Sean Makowitz there, who I think has got an editor credit as well as his kind of corporate role within Skybound. And sort of Kirkman and Sean Makowitz are sort of, it feels like they're kind of sitting at the top of the pyramid with the vision of the new Energon universe, with then Daniel Warren Johnson and Josh Williamson and so on, telling the detail of the stories and sort of fitting within a roadmap that those guys have envisioned. Are you able to kind of talk about the kind of that sort of high level thinking process that seems to be happening here in terms of how this universe is being created?
Yeah, I think certainly Robert Kirkman had a pretty clear idea of what he wanted to do from the start in terms of how he wanted to launch things, and that was part of that initial pitch. Of course, at that point, we did not know what the creative teams were going to be, but I would say that once we got things up and rolling, and we knew that Daniel was on board and Josh was on board, really they had the the framework came from Robert and Sean, and to an extent me, inputting from the Hasbro side and making sure that certain things were nudged a little bit. But, for the most part, the three of us sitting and figuring out exactly what's going to work and what's not from a Hasbro brand perspective, but also from a storytelling perspective. But then, so then that sort of outline, if you will, or structure went to Daniel and Josh. But I would say that their storytelling is very much their own, right? I mean, they took that and said, okay, we understand where you want to go. This is how we're going to tell that story. So, I don't know enough about the back and forth between Skybound and the creative teams themselves to know how much gets moved around or changed. But with very few exceptions, what I saw coming from Daniel and Josh was very, was an original interpretation of what the overall structure was supposed to look like. So a lot of the creative is driven by them.
Yeah, it's sort of from their telling, it sounds like they've been given broad kind of guardrails to work within, and maybe a specific idea to integrate. Like would like Duke to be introduced in the pages of Transformers, but up to you how you actually exactly achieve that. So it's sort of it's kind of those kind of constraints where the vast majority of the storytelling seems to be on the creator.
Michael, you have told us today and in the past about contributions you made to some IDW stories or direction. Is there something specific you recall pushing for or nudging at this high level early discussion with Kirkman and Mankiewicz?
Not on the side of things that really were approved. In this case, it was a little bit more of the, there's a few things that came through that just would have taken the brand in a way that we didn't really want to go. So there was a little bit more of a, it's an interesting idea. Love that idea in another context, but as it applies specifically to Transformers or G.I. Joe, it's not something that we can actually do without having to explain to a lot of people why we did that, and really kind of change the pitch and tenor of the story. So in those early days, it was a bit more of that in this case, but nothing so much that I think either Skybound or either of the creators would be, Hasbro really didn't let me do what I want to do. I think it was more of in fact, I'm pretty sure at one point Daniel Warren Johnson even said, like, I know that they're not gonna go for this, but I'm gonna say it anyway just in case. And it was a really interesting and compelling idea. It didn't really fit with the brand, and the way I think that we see it, and honestly, I think the way that most fans see it. So it was a bit more of that in these early stages. I think if things had continued for me there, I don't know. I mean, I certainly was loving the stories. So who knows? But yeah, no. All credit goes to Skybound and Daniel and Joss. Absolutely.
Were people from the G.I. Joe brand team or the Transformers brand team a part of this, the discussion in this relaunch?
So usually the way that it works is I would be the one having the conversations, and then I would update the brand teams on the direction and where things are going. There was a couple of, again, like some of those things that I said that we had to kind of change course on. Certainly the brand team was involved in those, and the discussion internally was, this is not something we can, at least at this time, do. But they tend to be a little bit after the fact in terms of the actual creative planning.
Because you're the editor at Hasbro. To use my term. That's
right. Yes. Yeah.
Going back to this photo.
I was going to say, talking about the brand team specifically, that what's interesting about the G.I. Joe take and what we're seeing in like the pages of Duke specifically is that we are definitely seeing like the classified look being mirrored in terms of how the characters are being represented, like how Stalker is shown, how rock and roll is shown, and these kind of things are leaning into the classified look. Is that kind of Hasbro and Skybound working closely together, or do you think or is it more a case of the creative team going, classified's cool, I just want to grab that and pull it into the book?
If that's the case, if that's what you're seeing in it, then it's 100% on the creative teams. Like, we never said you have to use this look at all. So yeah, that's either a pleasant coincidence, or it is because the creative teams were inspired by how cool the classified line is. Yep.
So your job was to interact with business people and storytellers, and to manage that and react to it. You also end up having this secondary occasional job where you are moderating a panel, or in the past, some people who were at Hasbro would show up in interviews sort of on DVD bonus features, like the making of Transformers. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about this other informal job that you had to occasionally do some PR at a convention, or that kind of thing? Do you feel like it's like, are you a natural fit for it? Is this something that you wanted to do more of? Was this always sort of like, okay, I got to hop on a plane, all right, I got to do that panel? How does all this find you?
I think, in terms of whether I like it, yeah, I do. I love it. I love that part of the job. I think it's fun. I rarely have any hang-ups about speaking in public or in front of crowds. That's something that I'm lucky to have. I know it's a hard thing for most people, but for whatever reason, I'm either, too dumb or too overconfident to be worried about that. So, I always enjoy it. I kind of enjoy seeing the reactions of the crowds and the people on the panels. I really enjoyed, IDW used to always invite me to join them on their panels to kind of give the Hasbro perspective. And I always enjoyed doing that as well. I wouldn't say it's a big part of the job, but it's a part of the job that you have to always be ready for, right? Because you just kind of never know. And especially when it comes to things like comics at a company like Hasbro, if anybody comes to the public relations, corporate communications department and says, hey, we want to talk about the comics, I'm the guy that they're going to send them to, right? I mean, so you never know. I literally sometimes would get an email at 9 a.m. in the morning from PR saying, you got to jump on the call with Publishers Weekly, or, comics, comicbook.com, or whoever it was, it was just, and it was just, you just had to be ready to do that. And, those things are less public, but sometimes more stressful, because, I'm sure you guys have been interviewed by the press before, and, they're trying to get you to say what you're not supposed to say. And they have all these little, these little tricks and tips on how to do that. So it's, it's different when you're at a panel at Comic-Con and somebody asks, are these going to be toys, which was the number one question I always got as the Hasbro guy. Is this going to be a toy? Like, I don't know, ask the toy team. But, like a really good journalist, they are trying to trip you up and get you to say the thing that you're not supposed to say. So but it's fun. It can be fun because it's kind of like a game, and if you really annoy a journalist, you've done a great job.
And a panel, a successful panel, is a certain kind of party. Most of the people are seated, and maybe you just get one question at a time, but it is a celebration. And I imagine if you're spending most of your time at a desk, at a computer, or on a plane, or at an airport, just emailing stuff, that if once a year or 3 times a year you get to go to a trade show and mug for the cameras and ham it up just a little bit, and sort of celebrate with the folks up on the stage. That must be a wonderful, like you said, relief. Not just for the secret you've been keeping, but
yeah. No, it is really fun. And I'll tell you, one of the things I always was a bit mystified, but always enjoyed about was, I think for the most part, particularly in the United States, I was always sort of behind the scenes. Like, a lot of people knew the editors. A lot of people obviously know the creators. Not many people know Michael Kelly at Hasbro, or, what kind of influence I had. But in China, they know exactly who I am. And I don't know exactly why. But when I go over there, like, people do line up for my signature in China. And I get feted at these, like these banquets and things like that. And people are all, oh my gosh, it's Michael Kelly. And I'll tell you, it's like that funny old saying, like, no, I'm really big in Asia. Like, yeah, I'm really big in Asia.
It's because I was going to say, maybe it's because of your cameo role at the very end of Rise of the Beast, the latest Transformers film. It was you're almost unrecognizable in that role, but it was.
Yeah. No, but this goes all the way back to, like, I think the first time I signed autographs in China was 2011.
What was the event?
It wasn't actually an event. I was at a publisher, and we were talking about the program, and they had told people that I was coming. And they said to me at the end of this big business, like literally was a business meeting about negotiating a contract, talking about some creative ideas for some of the children's books and things that they were doing. And they said, well, we have a few people who would like to meet you, if you don't mind. And, and they had all these books, they had all these My Little Pony comics and Transformers comics. And, like, if maybe you could sign some of these. And I was like, well, I didn't write these, or illustrate them. Like, no, but your name's in them. I'm like, yeah, they are. So then they open the doors, and like 50 people come walking through. And it was hilarious. But I mean, there was a lot of stuff like that. Just very funny. And then I went, I would go to Cybertron Con, which, the first year was in Shanghai. And people would come up to me and be like, oh my gosh, can we get a picture with you? I was like, oh, this is a really different world.
Is there a detail you're leaving out? Because in the American comics, your name is, it must be 4-point size in its font. It is the smallest I feel like any IDW has printed anything. The Hasbro special thanks. Is there something where the Chinese publisher is publishing your name bigger than the writers and the artists, and perhaps on top of their names?
Nope. No, but I do think that they, I think, well, I mean, who am I to say? But it does seem culturally that they're far more interested in what went into the book than, maybe American audiences are. Like, American audiences are probably more focused on the big names and then the story. I get the impression that the Chinese fans in general are they're very interested in how the book is made and who was involved, and like they really read that masthead, and they've asked me like, oh, do you know Ed Lane? And I'm like, yeah, I do know Ed Lane. So I mean, I'll talk about an ego boost. It's nice.
Sounds even better than hosting a superstar panel at San Diego, actually.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Mark, I think we have to get a photo of Michael in China signing a bunch of autographs. We have to scour the internet, to scour the Chinese YouTube for some shaky footage in an office of 50 people in line.
Believe it or not, I got a private tour by a government official of the Forbidden City because of who I am.
Well, Hasbro does have a long-standing relationship with China.
Yes. Yeah.
And you were in a long line of representatives from an American company that.
True.
I still feel like there's something missing. Somewhere your name was printed. It's like written by, drawn by. Did they just swap in your name for one printing? All the other creators got dropped out.
I had a question about the Skybound bound launch. About it feels very different because how the previous relaunches have happened, which is sort of going big straight away with the G.I. Joe #1 or G.I. Joe #0 or that kind of thing. It feels like we're sort of we're starting a little bit smaller. We've got Duke and Cobra Commander as spotlight mini-series, and the very first series was completely out of left field, being Void Rivals. We've only got one Transformers title against 3 G.I. Joe titles at the moment, so that we've got a good ratio over here. But I guess that did opening up as a general question, did you have any thoughts about that? Start it small before the main event?
Yeah, I think I think G.I. Joe in particular, because of where it sits in terms of sort of the pantheon, if you will, of Hasbro brands. I think it needed a slower start this time. I think it needed to really focus in on a few characters that are going to be key to the story going forward, but without sort of jumping into a cast of thousands right away. And so I think it's a really smart way of doing it. And again, it was part of the original pitch to do it this way. So it was really well thought out. But the sort of the idea that we'll do Transformers, and Transformers, you're going to see all of your, like a lot of your favorite characters are going to show up, and you're going to have the human element of it. But then G.I. Joe, we're going to sort of introduce slowly. And I think it's a great way for people who aren't particularly familiar with the brand to latch on to some of these great iconic characters, get to know them a bit better, get to know their motivation without having to deal with, oh wait, who's this guy and what's that person's doing? So I think it's really smart. And there's going to be a few characters, and then I'm sure they'll all come together, but I think doing it this way was really smart to engage a new audience as well as inspire older fans as well.
And at the same time, A Real American Hero 301 comes out, and there's a bunch of characters in the middle of a story. The C-130 does not crash.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
1 year on, it didn't crash. That was a few moment.
I laughed out loud. When I got to the final page of 300, because I had thought Hama was gonna wrap up some subplots but not quite end it, and then pick them up again. And I turned to the last page and I just laughed out loud. My wife said, "What is it?" And I said, "This cliffhanger."
Yeah.
And because IDW didn't necessarily want to promote the competition, there's not much of an allusion to where the series is going to end up next. And so, it's like, wait, what? Where do I go? I mean, I knew, but for everyone else.
Right.
And I guess I'll be told off if I don't sort of mention the question and see what your reaction would be. Is that we've got a bunch of new readers latching on to 301 who didn't read 300, and the sales numbers alone tell us that. And anecdotally, I'm hearing a lot of people coming back to the book, lapsed readers, which is obviously great for the book and for the brand. But there isn't an easy place to find the back issues, and particularly, the last 10 or so issues leading into 301. Tim's store carries it. Tim's store carries it. Hub Comics, hubcomics.com. But did you have any thoughts about that accessibility for new readers, and how potentially some of that back matter might be made available?
All I can say is that it certainly is within the grant of rights for Skybound to use that material. So I would guess that at some point they probably will do that. I don't know. I honestly don't know what their plans are in terms of when that will happen, but it certainly makes sense that they will do it at some point.
And if you did know, you couldn't say.
No, if I did know, I would tell you. Yeah, I would. Yeah, no, I mean, I like I said, they have the rights, and I'm pretty sure that they will eventually do it. I just don't know when.
So the number of months between 300 and 301, is that something that you can talk about? Because I had sort of assumed, and maybe Mark and I did, that there would be an announcement for a new publisher immediately, and that there would be this sort of keeping the momentum. Like, okay, loyal readers of 299 and 300, like, we'll be right back in just 2 or 3 or 4 months. And in the cycle of comic book solicitation, the catalog and advance ordering, it was becoming clear that this was many months off. And then we spoke to you, and you, I think, sort of confirmed it, something later. And then, and by the time it happened, I said to Mark, I think this was actually about creating some anticipation. And for lapsed readers, it wouldn't matter. They hadn't read 300. They weren't worried. Can you speak to that amount of time? And when you were there, were you involved in that, or is that sort of all about a publisher and their schedule?
It was, so part of it was because we didn't want anybody to know who the new publisher was until Void Rivals came out. Right. So I think that was the biggest part of it. Was once you say 301's coming from Skybound, everybody's going to be like, oh, now we know where it's going to go. And then I think when Void Rivals gets previewed, people say, oh, this is probably right. So we didn't want to give any, and then to the extent of, does it build anticipation? Yeah. I mean, I absolutely loved going on HissTank and watching people say, we're never going to get it again. It's over. It's done. And Hasbro blew it. They lost IDW, and they can't get anybody new to take the, it was great. I was like, yep. The more
it's definitely going to be this. It was the post where it's definitely going to be this publisher that no one's ever heard of before, because they've done a teaser logo post. But also, I guess I get this sense from an outsider point of view that for a lot of the IDW run, it was very much a treadmill of just trying to keep up to the deadline of that monthly grind of getting the book out, and having a little bit of a longer lead, I guess must have given a little bit of a feeling of breathing room and being able to take a little bit more time into crafting the book beyond just we just have to get it done to hit the next deadline.
Yeah. It's always nice when you can build in a buffer. And like I said, I want to say before 301 even was announced, I think Larry had finished 304. So, it was kind of nice to just have that extra time and built out, because it makes everything easier. But
also,
then you catch up.
Yeah, and then it just disappears. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Very quickly.
Yeah, we might be having a skip month coming up in, is it March?
In April.
In April.
April.
But also, I was saying this to to Mark at the time that even though Skybound is a well-oiled machine, to take on Real American Hero and get into its rhythm, right? So, Skybound tends not to do licensed books. It's done some Lego Ninjago, but Skybound is not Marvel in the 80s doing, Star Wars and G.I. Joe and Transformers and Sectars. Don't forget Sectars. It's coming back, apparently. And so to build up its pipeline to, send in a plot, get it approved, have it come back, like an added step of a Diana Davis, which is not on a lot of normal licensed books, much less normal books. And then the art's got to get approved. And so I had sort of imagined that a lot of that lead time was, all right, well, we might be able to do an issue in 4 weeks, but the first issue is going to take, 13 weeks. And maybe the second issue will take, 9 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, everybody forgets that people are humans and that stuff comes up, and even if you've got a well-oiled machine and a tight schedule that everybody's trying to adhere to, if one cog slips, a lot of things happen really quickly. So it's a really complex project, and you build in the time that you think it's going to take, and then you pad that time, and sometimes it works and sometimes it just doesn't. And I think that's what certainly it's understandable that people get frustrated if a book is late, but it's a remarkable process to get a comic book from script to print, especially if it's a licensed comic, because you do have that extra layer of someone like me having to come in and look it over, point out a few things that make a few minor changes, but it is not a business for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
Were you at all you have sounded sort of in a good way, sort of hands off with Hama's Real American Hero for a long time. With the relaunch, besides sort of, Hama can do what he wants and there aren't any toy requirements, but, new artist, new color artist, new letterer, and maybe a new focus just because of the energy at a new publisher. Were you involved in any discussions with that team, with that editor, about how that book was going to start and be? No further really than I just want you to give Larry as much reign as you can, because that's really where we want to be. And, within the confines of Skybound, Skybound also has a reputation to uphold, right? So they need to be putting out good quality books. So, I think from my perspective, it was, if you're having an issue with something, let me know and we'll figure it out. But, other than that, I would like Larry to be able to do what he wants to do. And I think they felt the same way. So the great thing about Larry is that you're not worried about him, you're not worried about him suddenly going rogue and coming up with something completely bizarre that doesn't make any sense. And, so I think there's a level of trust that develops, both not just for me, who's worked with him for years, but obviously the Skybound guys knew what they were getting into when they signed him on. So no, not an awful lot. I do, obviously reviewed the new artists and looked at some of their artwork, but what's to complain about there, right? I mean, it's pretty spectacular. So
some people might find a way, but yeah,
well,
the consensus is for sure that
it's a great looking book.
It's something to behold. Actually, we're talking about Diana and the team. Here's a nice picture from San Diego, which I sort of popped that on. And something that Diana had mentioned was that she felt to her like maybe the book they're letting them the team is being let to do get away with a little bit more. Perhaps was the words that she used. Like, I think it was in issue 300, 301. Serpent or Khan shoots a sort of a zombie pensioner in their head, and their head explodes in a big splatter of red, which is the kind of thing that might not have been allowed at certain points. But do you get the sense that I guess it's between Hasbro and I guess Skybound's aesthetic and approach that maybe they're just pushing they're pushing the envelope a little bit more and allowed to do that?
Yeah, I think again, it's sort of how you build upon success after success, right? Where you show. I think what we really did and what we succeeded in over the years was showing that we could tell stories that were maybe a little bit more edgy, a little bit more over the top in terms of literally their comic book nature, and how stories are told and what you can, I don't want to say get away with because it's not really the right phrase, but what the expectation of the audience is when you're telling stories in the comic book genre. I think we were able to prove over the years to Hasbro in particular that we can have fun with this and we can push some envelopes that maybe 15 years ago people wouldn't have been comfortable with, and it's not going to hurt the brand, B, it's going to get people more excited about the books because they, what maybe they had come to expect now those guardrails are off, and now there might be more and more surprises coming down the line. So keep reading, because it's not going to be the same old thing that you've been used to. We're going to try different things, and we're going to push some envelopes and have some fun with it. So I think that's what you're going to see. I think you're going to see an embrace of the really giving creators a bit more free reign to express the story and the appearance. So yeah, I think it's pretty exciting times.
Absolutely. I think that was most of my questions. I had a slightly tangential question, which was just coming from like the fan community. There's a lot of sort of publishing endeavors coming from, in the toy community and also in the publishing community, that a lot of exciting projects coming out of that direction. And just recently we had Carson Metaxas's collecting the art of G.I. Joe, which I think got the official Hasbro licensing stamp. So presumably that came across your desk, but it feels like just from that project alone, there's a lot of other sort of exciting energy in the G.I. Joe publishing community.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think a lot, and I think we had this discussion the first time we spoke, which is sort of this idea of Hasbro as these like corporate suits, and we just come in and crush good ideas. But the fact is, there's that balance. There's the balance between the fact that these are, they're trademarks, they're legally protected, and there's a whole book full of laws about how that's interpreted, and yet at the same time, there's a lot of passion with the fan community. There's a lot of really talented people out there that want to put their mark on it, and I think, I would encourage people that are doing that to don't dismiss the idea of actually making it officially licensed, because on the one hand, you get that protection if if it works out and Hasbro wants to do it, you get that protection from the law and the seal of approval, if you will. But you also you do get access to the resources that my team brought to the table, right? And you get literally professionals who have lived and breathed these brands for years that will look over the book, give you some pointers, give you some ideas on how to maybe structure some things a little bit better. But on the flip side of that is we can't do everything, and there's a lot of projects that come through that just that aren't going to work out. But and I think I would say pre-pandemic, there was certainly a bit more resistance internally to doing to looking sort of to the creator community. But I think that's another aspect that the company has evolved and changed a bit, to be a bit more open to other creative expressions where possible. But again, the other issue is we have to protect the agreements that we have in place. We have to make sure that there's not going to be overlap, that there's not going to be competition with our licensed partners who often are investing an awful lot to have those licenses and to develop against them.
I feel like there's probably loads of things that I should have asked, but have not. Is there anything obvious to you that about the Skybound launch that we've not yet touched on?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we covered most of it. I mean, the big parts of it were their creative vision and the surprise. I think the surprise was so huge to the success, just in terms of getting people talking about it, the buzz and the excitement. And now we're seeing numbers on these books that we haven't seen in 30, 40 years, or in some cases ever. So that's really great.
Tim, was there any final questions from you?
No, I'm all good.
Excellent. So I think that that just leaves us to say thank you again, Michael, for joining us, being so generous of your time, and beyond that, thanks for being such a good steward of the G.I. Joe brand in publishing for all of this time, and giving us all of the stories that we've seen over the last few years, and particularly big, again, hats off for helping Larry Hama to come back and deliver double his original amazing run that we had from him at Marvel, which is kind of an enormous achievement from everyone involved, and for your part in delivering this this amazing new instance of G.I. Joe at Skybound that has really sort of seemed to just really got everyone very energized and excited, and brought a lot of new and lapsed readers back into the fold, which is obviously going to be good for G.I. Joe as a whole, particularly in publishing.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been one of the real highlights of my life to have the honor of working on those books with those creators, with these different companies. It's been really fantastic. And, honestly, I'm going to miss it. I'm going to miss it quite a lot. But, it's time to see what's next.
Absolutely.
We wish you great luck and interesting projects and journeys in what's next. And please keep in touch.
Yeah, will do. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
Excellent. So, thank you very much to Michael Kelly. Hope everybody enjoyed that. And see you next time on Talking Joe, because we are done. And remember that
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters. There we go. Great. Thanks a lot, Michael.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I think we actually went longer than the last one.
Yeah. Well, you've given us enough rope, and
there was a little more to talk about this time.
Yeah.